Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm Karen McQuestion. My co-host Tess Thompson is away on family leave, so it's just me today. But I am absolutely thrilled to have Jacque Ben-Zekry as a guest. Jacque is a developmental story editor, primarily working with mystery, thriller, suspense, crime, sci-fi, fantasy, and historical novels. She also works in screen and stage play story development. Projects she has worked on have gone on to be New York Times bestsellers, Wall Street Journal bestsellers, and Amazon bestsellers, as well as nominations for the PEN/Faulkner, the Edgar, the Silver Dagger, the ITW Thriller Award, the Hugo, and the Harper Lee. Jacque has been a developmental story editor for more than 10 years and has worked on over 100 novels. Her clients range from bestsellers to first-time novelists. In her spare time, Jacque writes for television, hikes, does yoga, travels, eats far too much, and enjoys red wine. She lives in Colorado with her partner, 3 stepkids, 2 idiot dogs, and a cat. Welcome, Jacque.
Thanks, Karen. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I should mention that the name of your company is Modify Editorial Services, and we will have a link in the show notes if someone would like to contact you. I'd love to hear about your background. How did you start out in the publishing business, and what led you to start a business offering developmental editing?
That's a great question. And I've actually been in therapy quite a bit about it. So, I can actually detail you an answer, like in most things. So when I was a kid, I had undiagnosed dyslexia. I guess I am still dyslexic, but we didn't find out till I was in my 20s. So I really, really struggled with reading. And my father was a massive, avid reader. He would read, a novel every week. And we're talking about massive sci-fi, 500 pagers, the tomes. So I think as a child, I really grew up with this idea and I thought my father was the smartest man on the planet. I just adored him. And I really grew up with this internal thought that being smart was being able to read a lot. And so it became like a weird, again, I've been in therapy for it, but it became like an obsession, like this desire to read, despite the fact that I just couldn't. I really, really, really struggled. Because I taught myself to read, I read differently. And so I've always seen writing differently. Things that were hard to read, instead of being like, oh, that's a weird sentence and moving on, which is what I think most people do. I go back and read each word and reword it until it made sense to me, until I could understand what somebody was trying to communicate with me. And so I think, I can't say for sure, but I think that my sort of deeper understanding of the mechanics of story and pure entertainment came from the fact that I was spending most of my young adult life rewording and reworking things that I read and things that I was participating in, and trying to make it make sense when my brain didn't do things the way other people's brains did. So that's really how I think the whole thing started for me, and I think, I don't know if this is a show, if you don't mind me saying this, but, to be an editor, you really have to be a judgmental asshole. You just have to be that kind of person. The kind of person who doesn't just like look at things and say, oh, that is what it is. You have to be continuously breaking things down and taking them apart and being curious sort of person. And that, for whatever reason, personality type, whatever, is very natural for me. When I was a teenager, I read a biography of Jackie Kennedy, and there was like a couple of chapters that were thrown away about her, about reading books for a living, which was something everybody knows about writers, but very little time, especially in the children's and college years of life, is spent talking about editing and publishing and where that comes from. And so this enchanting concept of like somebody who reads books for a living, which if I could go back and talk to my younger self now, I'd be like, not so glamorous, girl. But at the time, at the time, it sounded so cool and amazing. But I didn't know how to break into that. So I, blah, blah, blah. I went to college for psychology, and just did not have either the ability to pay attention, go back ADHD again, and the desire to stay in school long enough to be a doctor or anything like that. So it just sort of came back home to the Tri-Cities where I was from, my one-horse town, and ended up getting a job at Amazon because I needed health insurance. And it was just this sort of like really normal sort of like poor person story of like, okay, I have to do something, or I won't be able to, go to the doctor when I'm sick. And so I started in operations working at customer service, answering the phones. So I immediately, like within a couple of months of working there, tried out for another job within Amazon doing statistical analysis and process improvement, which is not something I'd gone to school for. I just thought it was really cool. And to their credit, they saw something in me that was, really great and like amazing at that time. And so I started traveling and doing a whole lot of work, like doing things like changing the website to make it easier for people to actually return things, and looking at why people had such a hard time picking out televisions on the website, and just, using math to make decisions.
I had no idea. I mean, I was an Amazon publishing author, so we crossed paths later, but I didn't know that you had all these different kinds of jobs. That's fascinating.
Yeah, you would go like, so what would happen is they'd be like, oh, for some reason for the last year, shoe sales are down, and, the sales team would be working on it. Everybody would be working on it. They'd be like, can the process improvement team and operations take a look on their end? Like, what do you think is happening? And it was actually kind of crazy because this particular project, I got my green belt in Six Sigma, which is boring and I won't get into, but I loved this job. And it was like breaking down the reasons why people weren't buying. And we honed in on returns. Returns on Amazon were very difficult. Shoes require returns, right? So then now dig even deeper. Why is it so difficult to do returns? And I ended up redesigning the returns process and doing all this other stuff. And it saved the company the first year that we had this within the shoe business, like $2.5 million, which at that time was a lot of money to Amazon. Like today, that's like, Jeff Bezos wipes his butt with that. But like at the time, it was a big deal. I'd solved a problem. They were going to shut down shoes on Amazon, and like this saved it. Yeah, so I had a little heat on me from that project, and found this job at Amazon Publishing. And they were looking for something called an author relations manager. So like I applied for it and asked and talked to the Vicky Griffith at the time, who was the hiring manager. Like, what is this job? And she's like, well, that's part of the gig. You would make it up. We don't know what it is. We just need somebody to help us both talk to authors and answer their questions and reduce the amount of time that editors and marketing managers and publicists are spending, answering everyday stuff. But also we want somebody who can come in and quantify happiness, and how do we make authors happy, and how do we then, once we have quantified it, how do we measure it continuously and increase it, and spend our money on programs that will make people happy. And oh my God, it was like all the things I wanted to hear, because psychology, I was like, happiness, how do we mathematically how do I do that? And then process improvement, statistical analysis, like, I got so excited about that. And then, talking to writers, I was like, my lifelong obsession with, reading, like that was totally the thing. So applied for the job. For whatever reason, I still don't know fully to this day, they hired me. And sort of from there, I was the 9th employee. So it wasn't even called Amazon Publishing them. It was just called Encore. And they had one imprint, and they were working on some other cool stuff. Like our mission was that Jeff Bezos said that he wanted every book that had ever been published to be available on the Kindle within 60 seconds or less. He wanted a book to never go out of print again and never be unavailable to a reader in all of time. And so a lot of the work early on was the team was digging up into like books that had gone out of print that you couldn't find anymore and making them available on the Kindle. And it was this sort of beautiful thing. And I was really, again, enchanted by it. I loved it.
What I remember from that time is that I was told that my author relations manager, and it was you, was like a concierge for the authers.
Ooh.
And
Yeah.
so, that was kind of a cool thing. And
Hmm.
so it was nice to have this intermediary who was like, you don't understand a line in your contract? I'll find out and get back to you.
Yeah.
So, and that was what you did. I didn't realize that you did these other things because I thought you were sitting at your computer waiting for Karen McQuestion to
Oh, yeah.
email, ask
Email
about
or
her
call.
contract.
Yeah. No, and it was a lot of fun, but one of the things that was always sort of problematic about the author relations manager role is that my job was to advocate. So even when I was trying to create, a new royalty system or whatever, like throwing a party on top of a building in New York City, you're always trying to get other people to want to do those things with you. You're never actually having any control. And this isn't, I mean, I am a bit of a control freak, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was really like, how much can I actually impact somebody's career as a writer if I'm not actually involved in any of the stuff that truly matters in publishing? I am the person who is like, sending you your a birthday present and remembering when like your publishing day and doing fun stuff like that, which is so important, I think. And it's nothing negative about that job or anybody who does that job, but it wasn't enough for me. You know what I mean? I wanted to be more involved in the business end of stuff. And so I ended up moving into marketing, which was sort of a difficult process because you have to do 7,000 Amazon interviews and, prove yourself, even though everyone knows you already. It's sort of weirdly challenging. So joined the marketing team and eventually became like the head of all mystery, thriller, suspense, crime, science fiction, fantasy marketing, and then also the head of international marketing. And I was doing that for a long time and I loved that job. One of the things I did as author relations managers, was bringing out authors to BEA or to different big book conferences and, sort of managing their flights and their hotel, but also taking them out to dinner and organizing things with their editors and managing their schedule and all this other sort of stuff. So those trips you'd be spending 15 hours a day with your 5 to 10 authors that you're overseeing. So it'd be very cathartic, almost intimate time with these people. And I was in New York and I was hanging out with Blake Crouch and John Rector and who was the other author that was there? This is going to make me crazy. Anyways, we'll come back to that. It might have been Sheila Redling. And Blake was like, hey, I have this novella that I know Thomas and Mercer won't want because it's so short. But I'd love to your opinion if you thought it was good, and this is before I'm in marketing, I could try to make it into a full book. And I was like, oh, cool. And, now as an older adult, I'm like, oh, okay, he was trying to manipulate me into helping him get the inside edge at Amazon. But at that time, I was just so flattered that an author wanted my opinion on anything because nobody asked, do you like my book? Which is a dangerous question. I was young enough at that time to answer it, honestly. So he sent me the novella and I read it on the plane home and I called him and I was like, okay, I have notes for you. And I literally had 7 pages of notes and on this very short novella. I had character issues. I had all this stuff. I was pretty brutal about it in retrospect. But at the time, I thought, he wanted my opinion. I'll give it to him.
In the spirit of being helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And also in the spirit of I didn't understand publishing enough at that point to know that this was a bad thing to do. And he was instead of being upset, he immediately called me and was like, oh my God, let's talk about this. And he asked me some questions and we brainstormed together and it was actually a really good creative experience. And he rewrote a significant portion of it to reflect my, ideas. And lo and behold, Amazon, he still didn't turn it into a novel, but he ended up publishing it and it became Good Behavior, which became a TV show.
With Michelle Dockery.
With Michelle Dockery.
Fantastic.
Yeah. But also Juan Diego Bata. That's a beautiful man. Yeah. So anyways, so some people within Amazon found out about it and they were pretty upset at me because they felt like it was a conflict of interest, which now as an older adult, I could see that it was. But at the time, I didn't get that. I got in a fair amount of trouble. And I don't know how Blake found out about it. I think maybe his agent told him. But Blake got really upset that they were mad at me. And he wrote the president at the time, which was Jeff Bell. They wrote him and said, I want Jackie to be my developmental editor on all of my books that I do with Amazon going forward, which was this. He didn't ask me if I even wanted the job before he said it. He was just she did a great job. Why is she in trouble? Type of thing. That's what opened the door. Was then at that point, author happiness wise, that he'd kind of checkmated them. They kind of had to say yes. And so they said, sure. And the next thing that he was writing that he was under contract for Amazon was Pines, which became the Wayward Pines series, which became that TV show.
Huge hit, as the books were huge.
Yeah.
Top of the
Millions of copies
charts
sold.
forever.
Yeah, it's a huge series. And it marks, for most people, if you've read his catalog, a significant change in his writing, which he will tell you himself, like, attributes to the fact that, obviously he changed his perspective on his writing, and he'll talk about that. But also, I just have a different editorial sense about things and really pushed it. We together, we really pushed those books as far as either of us were skilled enough to push them at that point, which was huge. And so that ended up opening up this whole other set of things, because then other authors heard about it, both inside Amazon and outside. I was getting external people who one way or another found out that I had done that, helped him with this, and I can't take credit for how great those books are. That's 100% Blake, but it's different, and people could see that, and they wanted to know why it was different. And that I was the statistical change, and so I started getting other authors who heard about it coming up to me. And it was sort of like Amazon owns your intellectual property, which we can talk about that on some other podcast if you want to get into the depths, nitty gritty on Amazon. But there is an issue where any work that I did, even outside of work hours, they own. So it became like this handshake agreement that I had with this multi-billion-dollar company that was basically like, hey, don't ask, don't tell. If you're doing this on your own time, as long as your work isn't suffering, as long as we're not hearing about it from authors, like we're not hearing people say, oh, well, they got a better marketing gig or they got a better blah, blah, blah because they worked with Jackie or whatever. As long as we don't have any conflict internally, I don't want to know about it. And that was a pretty good deal for me. So I didn't at that time call it Modify Editorial Services. I just started occasionally working on developing some books for some friends, mostly like people that, and like I said, in the author relations role, you're going on these trips, you're going to these conferences, you're seeing each other, you're spending 20 hours with these people, you become close, So I moved into acquisitions, and I came in and started buying my own books. I also inherited a list, and I was developmentally editing a few clients that I'd kept, and also developmentally editing some of the books that I was acquiring and working on for Amazon. So it was a busy, crazy time. But again, going back to that marketing thing, starting with a marketable book in the beginning is how to be successful as a marketer. But I was honestly very bad at acquisitions, and I'll tell you why. And it's because I've been through so much therapy that I can talk about it now, Karen. But it's because I saw the premise, I saw the promise, I saw it in every book. In every book, I saw something that had like value. I was coming to terms with the fact that I was more the, Harper Lee style editor. Like, this one chapter here is worthy. The rest of the book should be thrown away. But if you can do this for like 300 pages, you have something. And I was always seeing that in everything. And so it was very difficult for me to decide what books to buy and what books not to buy, what to tier them at. And for those of you unfamiliar with publishing, tiering is what level of sales are expected for each book. I think today I could do this job quite well, but at the time it was very difficult for me to separate what I saw in each book from the reality of the publishing industry, which is at the end of the day a business. But anyways, I ended up starting Modify Editorial literally the day I left Amazon. I quit like right around Thanksgiving. And I started my business, and I thought, we'll just see if it does anything in a year. I have enough money at that point. I'd saved enough to like live for 2 years fairly comfortably. So I was like, okay, if by the end of this year I'm making half of my money that I need to live on off of this business, then I'll keep going. And if at the end, and that was sort of like my, had to do math, Karen, to make my goals, math. And it was weird because like literally the day I left, I had work, and it was very quick how fast that happened, and how, I wouldn't say it's a hugely profitable business compared to how much money I was making at Amazon, but it was plenty for me to continue to do it. So,
I would guess a lot less anxiety.
Yeah, because in this particular role, this is about us working together on art. It's not about hard and fast, I know how to help or save or hurt your career. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a little bit different.
Well, now when people talk about editors, they talk about copy editors, line editors, acquiring editors, story editors, structural editors, developmental editors. Can you explain how yours is different from some of the others? And what is your process too?
Yeah, so the process, I guess the process is the best way to describe the whole thing. So, like a developmental editor, think of them as sort of like the fairy godmother that can jump in at any point in the process, literally up until copy editing, all the way until that point. So, I have clients that will send me their outlines. I have clients who will send me just their pitch of what they're thinking of. I have clients who will call me and just talk about ideas, all the way to the most common scenario is that a client will send me a finished first draft, or for them it's like probably their third or fourth, but it's the first official draft, and we start editing at that point. Every client is different, every process is different, but developmental editing is literally any action that helps develop the story. So it can be before you start writing, it can be after you've written several drafts. It can be after you've gotten a new agent and the agent thinks it needs work. It can be after you've sold it to the publisher and they still think it needs more work. It can be anywhere within the process. One of my skills is that I'm a style ape. So if I read enough of your book, I can write like you. And so I will just go in and write things for people to illustrate what I mean. And that's pretty common in dev editing, but not incredibly common. Different dev editors do it differently. But yeah, line editing is more about, you see it a lot in poetry. It's about your actual prose and your actual, pieces and parts of all that sort of stuff. Copy editors are the second to last part of this whole process. They are the people that come in and actually know things about grammar. So they're not me. I never do this. I'll catch stuff. I'll be like, yeah, these words in this order is grammatically wrong, or you need a comma here or whatever. But no, I wouldn't trust all of my copy editing advice ever. Those people are the people. They also do, and I do this too, fact checking. Copy editors are really, this is why I would always gear towards copy editors who do fact checking, because they can help catch a lot of stuff that, especially if you're doing historical, that are really, really important. But that's usually a part of the copy editing processing.
I'm wondering, do you read through it first like it's a book, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so I usually read it 2 or 3 times before I start actually editing. And so the first time is like, I'm just reading it to get my impressions and my feelings and get my heart right with the Lord, as they say. And then the second 2 or 3 times is like doing research. So who else has written something like this? What do I think you're trying to achieve? Who's done it very well? Let me go back and read some of that person's stuff. I prefer television and film because it's easier to use it in your editorial letter to say, hey, go quickly watch this episode of Bones, the TV show, because they do what you're trying to do very well. That's easier than asking someone to go read a whole book. But that research for helping illustrate for people, that all happens in the very beginning. I'm also at this time, diagnosing. What do I think are the problems? What are the positives? And then I start what I call redlining or line editing. And that's usually like the third or fourth read. And at that point, I start doing my structural work. So I start writing at what page number, what percentage point in the book does this happen? Who are all the character names? What attributes do we know about them? So my whiteboard can look like a crazy person's like serial killer, collecting the dots between the different things. Just because sometimes I don't even catch small mistakes that people make in the character logic and things like that. And then I'm also going through and noting in the column, this is what I mean when I say character work needed, or this is what I mean here. So it's in line, directly pointing to areas where things need to be improved.
So is this done with track changes?
Yeah,
is
with
that
track
how you
changes
do it?
on. So
Okay.
you see everything that I've changed and why I've changed it, if I'm changing anything. A lot of that becomes important in the second round. The first round, it's more like calling things out. I'm like, this is what I'm talking about, because then at the end of all of that, I take all of the crazy person notes that I've made in my diagrams and I write an editorial letter. And that letter is anywhere from 5,000 words to 30,000 words. Like they can be a book unto themselves, depending on the client, what they've asked for, what they need, their skill level. And it's not weird. I have bestsellers that get 15-page editorial letters, and I have first-time novelists who get like 10 pages. It just really depends on the book and what's going on. Sometimes it's better to put everything in line in the actual manuscript. A lot of it comes from like talking to the author and seeing what they prefer too. So then I do all of that and I package it all up and I send it to them. And the author has as much time as they want to do it. The only back and forth I have is like my schedule. Like I'm usually booked out 3 to 4 months. So, if you think you're going to be done in 4 months, let's schedule you in now. If you think it's going to take, a year, that's fine. Let's talk in a year, whatever it takes, however long. And a lot of times people will say, oh, I'll get this back to you in 3 months. And then almost every time, it's like, oh, I need 3 more months. Like, cool. I figured, like at that point.
You had a feeling.
Yeah. Usually you kind of know. And then when the book comes back, that's when I start. At that point, let's just say I called out a whole bunch of plot issues or character issues or structural issues, and you decided for whatever reason that you didn't want to make those changes. Hey, it's your book. You're paying me. If you don't want to take my advice, that doesn't hurt my feelings. And I want to make that very clear. You can take what you want from it. At that point, if you are saying you think that you're done with that portion of the editing, then I move into like line editing. Now I'm getting really granular on your words that you chose, the order that you put them in, the sentence structure, the flow, show, don't tell, tell, don't show, like all those different sort of pieces and parts. Dialogue is huge. I'm a big dialogue person because I do television writing. So it's like a very big deal to me to have dialogue be good. And so I do a lot of that. Again, it's mostly illustrative. I don't fix everything in the manuscript, obviously, that needs to be fixed, but I'll try to really, really dig in on a good 30 to 40% of it so people really can see, compare.
I've had editors point out something and it's like a learning experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then I can go through and go, okay, I did that on multiple occasions and I can go
Mm-hmm.
through. And so I think I understand what you're saying. You don't need to point out or fix every single one. If it's too wordy or it's, you have a bad habit of doing this, then you start to look for that bad habit.
Exactly. And hopefully you can kind of, but like, it's different. I mean, just because somebody's written like 25 books doesn't mean that they don't still like need somebody to call out, hey, you've made this mistake. But like all of this really is so interdependent upon the author. Like I have books that I've been working on for 3 years, that just like, they did a whole bunch of rewriting. And when you get done rewriting, sometimes you've introduced new problems or I see new opportunities or I get excited about something different. And so then we might, so I have books where I've been doing the structural plot, character work, world building stuff, 5-6 rounds.
Do you have the ability to look at it with fresh eyes when it's sent back to you? Because that's something I always wondered. I've had friends who are authors send me a manuscript and then because we just, beta read for each other. And basically they know, don't send it back to me because I might even remember the earlier version and somehow apply it to what they're giving to me. So that is a specific skill you must have, I'm guessing.
Some of it, yeah. I mean, I definitely think that's a good question. Sometimes I do lose. So I don't talk directly about who my clients are. It's up to them to recognize me. So, but I have been working on we'll just say big, crazy fantasy novel for a long time now. And I did lose objectivity at a certain point. We had done like 4 rounds and I was like, I honestly don't know anymore. Why don't we send it out to a few agents and see what because this was an author who was trying to transition to a new agent. That was part of why they brought me on, was to help, get something into place so that they could make a bigger, a lot of the work I do is like somebody wants to move to the next level in their career. And so to do that, you need somebody to like kick your ass, So this was it was a risk too, a calculated risk because, you only get someone's attention sometimes once. And so, if you're sending it to agents at that point, you might, lose the chance to go back to them later. So I don't typically recommend doing this unless it's something where I'm really losing objectivity. I'm just not sure anymore. We need to bring somebody else who is skilled in this area, not like your friend or your family member who, by the way, all those people can give you great advice. Even other writers can give you good advice, but there's a difference between that kind of advice and what an agent will say or what an editor will say. Like that's a different skill set. I'm kind of a jerk, actually, is the answer. And so it's not weird I expect when I send you back the edits the first time I've read a book of yours that 30,000 of your words are going to be cut and rewritten. So if you didn't change it a lot from the last time so that I'm surprised and there are new things happening in it, then that tells me that you are done with that portion of the writing. So then at that point, I switch gears to how do I make what this is the best that it can be? And that's that's line editing. That's much more granular than it is me saying, hey, this character doesn't work. And because the character doesn't work, now your plot isn't working. When your plot doesn't work, now we have a structural issue. And, like the hierarchy, it's Jenga. Once you pull the thread on one of those things, 50,000 things have to change if you're serious about editing. But not every book needs that level of editing either. Like I'm honest with people when they send it to me, and I'm like, hey, look, I'm not even going to charge you as much because I actually think this is pretty close. But here are my 3 major concerns, So that's not that weird either. It's pretty uncommon for me, but that's usually because people are coming to me with a specific goal. So if you come to me and say, I want to write the next Jurassic Park, I'm going to take you at your word. I'm going to push it to be that good. I'm not going to pull my punches and be nice about it. And if you send it back to me the second time and it's not good enough to be the next Jurassic Park, I'm going to say, well, this isn't good enough to be the next Jurassic Park. So I guess we're starting over, right? I know it sounds brutal. But that's why people hire me, and I try to take that very seriously.
Now, you said something earlier about, your whiteboard, and it sounded to me like you were parceling out the story, like at this percentage, this should be happening at that percentage. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
To me, that reminds me of story structure books like The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler and Blake Snyder's Save the Cat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a specific book or methodology that you'd recommend?
I love both of those books, and I wish especially more people would read Save the Cat if you were trying to write commercial fiction. I do want to draw a pretty significant line here. Commercial fiction is not the same thing as all literature and all writing. I happen to think that the hardest thing in the world is to communicate effectively on a topic that you care about and create amazing characters that millions of people will want to read. That to me is the highest challenge bar that exists. A lot of people will look at that and probably listen to me talking about money and sales and be like, oh, I don't want to commercialify my art that way. And that is absolutely up to you. I just think that that's easier personally. I think it's harder to make something that millions of people will want to read and love and talk about and talk to each other about. That character development, that writing that plot is so much harder. And Blake Snyder, what he talks about, especially in Save the Cat, is about making something commercial. The problem with that book, and the thing that I always caution people about, is that it should be something that you don't read in order to sell more copies of your book. It's that cycle. You know what I mean? It's like the more desperate you become to sell something, the more generic your writing will become. Read Save the Cat to understand how to take your idea that you've come up with that is wholly new and creative. Well, nothing's wholly new, but you know what I mean? That is your art. And how do I then transform it into something that is more palatable to more people? That's the way to use Save the Cat. That's the way to use books like that. So that is typically what I'm doing. I do the traditional 4-act structure. I believe 100% in this should happen here, this should happen here. But I use a method. I don't know if I created it or if it's I pulled it accidentally out of somebody else's book and don't remember where I got it from. That really focuses on the promise of the premise. So in the first 10% of the book, you need to establish your premise, your character, your world with me. Then the second, 10 to 15%, 20%, depending on the book, should be exploring the promise of the premise, which is otherwise known as the fun and the game. So this is where we're saying, okay, now Mary Poppins can't, the problem in Mary Poppins, the premise is the bank's children are out of control and the family doesn't know what to do about it. They're in turmoil. What are they going to do? Mary Poppins shows up. Can she save them? That is the premise. The promise of the premise is, can she use her magic to help the children understand the world they live in, feel less insecure, and be more behaved and understand, have a better family dynamic. So now we have to explore her magic. That's the promise of the premise. The premise being, can Mary Poppins save them? And then, okay, now we should have at the midpoint some kind of problem. There should have been conflict already, but some kind of problem that undermines the promise of the premise. And one of the biggest mistakes people make in novel writing is that they're not bringing everything tightly back to that original premise. So when you start having these meandering plot lines, character arcs, story, or you start having conflict that has nothing to do with our original premise, I, as the reader, cannot trust that you know what you're doing. And I lose interest and I stop reading. And so to me, the traditional 4 acts, or 3.5, depending on what school of thought you come from on that, story structure is really just about refining your basic concept into something that is accessible, exciting, interesting, fulfills the reader wants with what the writer wants, because hopefully your premise is what you ultimately wanted to achieve with the book, and can make people excited about, talking about this book to other people. Because when stories follow structure, people know how to talk about it. When you meander and you don't think about these things, you make it very difficult for readers to understand what they're supposed to take away from it. But I do want to make one thing very clear. What we define as the beats, which is what should happen in what percentage of these books, is entirely creative. It can be at the discretion of the writer. It doesn't have to be bad guys close in here. It can be your version of bad guys closing in, which could just be your main character having a panic attack. It could just be that her cat gets lost. Like, the thing that is the raising of the stakes for you doesn't have to be traditional. Some guy jumps in with a gun and starts shooting everyone. It can be, that somebody's diary got read by their best friend. That betrayal, that's bad guys close in. So I think a lot of people get artistic about beats, and they don't understand that the beats aren't here to tell you what to do. You should be able to skillfully manipulate the beats. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. And what I
Yeah.
usually do is I love the writer's journey. I have like a dog-eared copy, and I usually don't look at it until I'm like 3/4 the way through a manuscript, and almost like reverse engineer, like, am I sort of following the pattern? And maybe I'm not. Maybe things are out of order, or maybe I skipped something, but it's by design. Or maybe I feel like the middle is, like you said, meandering a bit. It's sort of just as a guide to help me look at the structure and sort of jumpstart the editing process a little early so that I don't make more mistakes towards
Keep
the
making
end.
this. Yeah. And then you make yourself crazy. Why did I write 20,000 words I'm not going to use? My biggest piece of advice for anybody who's struggling with structure or writing or anything, and it's probably the number one issue that every writer struggles with, whether they be the first-time novelist, or they've written 100 books, is make every scene do 3 things. If your scene does one thing, it is garbage scene that needs to be thrown away. Like, if you're interjecting an entire chapter or even 3 pages of just some of character development that does nothing else to move your plot forward, that does nothing else to raise the stakes, it doesn't world build, it doesn't do other things, then you can't have that scene anymore, because everything should do at least 3 things at once. And if you start looking at your scenes that way, the beats become easier, because the whole thing is like, okay, I need this beat here, but I also really want to understand why Megan has a drug addiction problem, and I need actually to put that here by the 20% points so people understand it. So so now how do I make those 2 things come together? And that is the act of real art in writing, is figuring out how to do that. And I always use Game of Thrones as an example with this one, because there's this like really beautiful scene where Theon Greyjoy goes to see his sister, and he's about to leave, and it's before he's been mutilated. Spoiler alert. And she's in the middle of them fighting about him leaving to go try to conquer parts of to defy his father's, wishes and conquer part of the land. She's like, "You were a terrible baby, don't you remember?" And like, she talks about that for it's like 4 sentences. It feels throwaway, but you know what it does? It establishes who she is. It establishes who he is. It establishes where they come from. It establishes why she's so upset that he's leaving and doing this betrayal. It also establishes why he's doing it, at the same time that we're keeping action moving because he's about to leave, and we are seeing what their family dynamic is, which is world building. And it's a 3-minute scene, and it is the most genius thing in writing. And I think that is what structure is really all about, is about like condensing but keeping everything you want, and just making everything work harder and be worth the time that the reader is spending, not being with their family, not going out with their friends and having a nice drink, or not working in their yard, or any number of other things. You have to make it worth their time.
Now that brings me to my next question. Can you actually watch movies or read books and turn off the internal editor? Or are you kind of thinking, oh, I would have transitioned that differently, or, or combine those 2 scenes? How does that work for you?
It's impossible. I don't really. And I am an impossible person to watch movies and television with. Because first of all, I'm always guessing the ending or what's going to happen next to the character. I think the next beat is going to be this and this is how they're going to do it because they landed this here and that seems to be the hint that means this is going to happen. I'm just that weirdo. It's part of why I typically will have like 2 glasses of wine before I watch a television show because I can turn some of that off. But no, I don't and I can't. And I would also say to any writer out there who is aspiring, you should be turning that on if you're not. If you're not using every chance you get to interact with every story to not just enjoy it, but to break down why does this device work? What did the writer do here? Why did they do it? If you're not reading scripts occasionally just to see how this works within the television shows that you like, you're missing out on, you were asking about Save the Cat and some of these other things. I don't believe in books about writing per se. I mean, I'm not saying that they're wrong. A lot of them are really great. I think the best thing you can do is to be taking apart your entertainment on your own and really examining why does this scene work? It's not enough that Cormac McCarthy did it. The question is, why does it work? If you're not in-depthly doing that analysis in everything that you're consuming, you're missing out on great learning opportunities to become a better writer. But I will say I am especially the worst at it. I'm especially bad at it. I mentioned that I have ADHD and dyslexia. I also have synesthesia. Neurodivergence is pretty common. If you have one, you have several. So if something is wrong in a book, it's red. If something is wrong in a television show, it's red. If a character is wrong in a show,
So wait,
it's
wait.
red.
So you literally see it like pop up in red.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yellow,
God. It's like a weird
orange.
superpower.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a superpower. It's pretty freaking annoying half the time. But what is helpful, it's probably what is very helpful for me as an editor is that if something is wrong, then I can, it'll squirrel in my head. It'll bother me. I'll be like, why is that red? Why is that red? Why is that red? So I can't give up until I've diagnosed why it is. Same thing in television, same thing with anything else. Doesn't mean I'm always right. But for me, I know something is wrong.
So you've used the word diagnosed more than once. Is that how you think of it? Like you're just a story doctor almost?
Yeah, I think of it as like, I'm not serving my authors well at all if I am spouting my opinion. My job is to find root cause analysis, to do root cause analysis. What is the root cause of this problem or this concern that we have? It's, like if you go into your doctor and you say, my foot hurts, it's like, well, it could be your foot, or it could be that you have something else entirely wrong in your hips that's causing, like a different weight displacement or whatever, right? Like any number of things could cause any number of other things. If I say, oh, I don't like this character, that's not helpful. It doesn't mean anything, why don't I like this character? Is it the way she's written? Is it the way that, is it her actions? You eventually get to this point where it's like, oh, you know what? The actual problem that I have is perhaps the way that she's actually being introduced. She was introduced in a way where she was portrayed as funny, witty and smart. And then by the end of the book, you have her being, lazy and emotional and not funny and not smart. And like, I don't understand where that arc came from. And I might have diagnosed, I don't like this character, but the real problem is that you don't understand your character. That's a big part of it. I don't ever want my opinion to get in the way of objectively, regardless of if I like the book or not, what good writing is. Yeah.
Have you ever gotten a client and you got the manuscript and it just needed so much work, like they needed to get back to basics?
Yeah, especially first-time novelists. And, I want to say this to anybody out there who's aspiring as their first-time novelist. There's not a reason not to engage a developmental editor, but usually the first book is not publishable. And I say that to people right off the bat. I use it as an opportunity to teach somebody how to write. But we will refine this book that you've sent me, because this is what you obviously care about, as far as I can, as far as I'm able to go. But usually at the end of that process, most people are like, I just have to write a new book. And that is usually what ends up happening in those scenarios. But yeah, there have been people who've come to me before they probably should have. My process is that I'm a big idea person. So I know, I feel like this whole podcast is going to come off as like I am so full of myself. But I know I'm really good at structure. I know I'm really good at character. I know that I'm quite good. And I'm not the best at plot, but I'm very good at it. Those are like my skill sets, and world building science. Science is like definitely my highest skill, like making science digestible to the masses. So I get a lot of work that way. I don't choose books based on, obviously I read it to the first couple of pages to make sure you can write a sentence, because that's a big deal. But beyond that, all I care about is the idea. I'm big idea all the way because I know I can help you fix the other things. But if your idea isn't interesting remotely to me from the get-go, then we're not going to work well together. Like if your idea is derivative, it's something I've read before, if it's not that big interesting to me. But so what happens, the downstream effect of my style of deciding how to work on a book is that big ideas don't necessarily mean great writing or great story. Like you have to figure that out along the way. And so a lot of time, if I do end up with books where I'm like, oh my God, I don't know actually how to fix this, a lot of times it comes back to, the whole, I keep saying the Harper Lee thing, but the whole, like, here's this chapter right here, this focused vision you have right here is what the rest of the book needs to be. I need you to use pattern recognition to use this to figure out how to do the rest. And unfortunately, I'll send you an editorial letter and I will send you a red line, but this might be a journey that is going to take you quite a bit of time on your own because I can't actually make you become a better writer in a week or a month or even a year. That's has to be developed very slowly over time.
As a writer, I think that's not uncommon. I knew I was nearly reached my potential when I could look back at something I had done 6 months earlier and thought it was pretty good. Because prior to that, I would look at things I had done the year before and think, oh my God, I thought at the time I wrote this, I thought it was pretty good, but it so clearly sucks. So when I got to the point where it was like, okay, well, this is like close to what my vision was and what I had hoped it would be. And I feel like even now I've written more than 20 books. Every book, I'm like, okay, I can do better. This one will be better than the last one, I hope. And I don't always reach that, but there's no coasting for most authors.
I think the ones that are successful, who have long tail careers like you, who have readerships, who keep being able to write, are the people that are challenging themselves too. I think one of the most dangerous things I see as an editor who watches people's careers is like, settling in on and coasting your way through and not challenging your ideas, your writing, your storytelling, your process. I mean, just because you've gotten, going back to the Blake Crouch example, because it's a good one, there was a period of time where, and he'll say this if you ever read any of his stuff on his, website and stuff, is like, for a long time he was writing what he thought would sell well and what people wanted. And the decision to push beyond that to writing something weird and not in his genre and not in his thinking was a huge thing for him. And then the next phase was pushing beyond even that. And if you are, writing 15 books about dogs or whatever, like that, I mean, I'm happy for you, but that's not going to develop into being the kind of writer that has a long tail career, that has, a lot of experiences that they can bring to the table that can do diverse writing. And maybe that's not what you want, like I know quite a few writers who have like fantasy novels where they're on their 15th book and friends of mine, and like they like the comfort of knowing the same characters and doing the same things over and over again. There's nothing wrong with that. But are you becoming a better writer? I mean, I don't know.
And I think the biggest compliment to me, if you can say about an author, every book of theirs is different. It's still their voice. It's still the kind of storytelling they tell. But I don't feel like, oh, I know what this is going to be exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I love it when people come to the table and don't really know what to expect. I like that better. For me as a reader, my thought is always, oh, I want to read something more like what I just got done with that I loved. But then when you actually do that, you're like pretty bored, right? Like, oh, this is pretty similar to what I just read. Like, what's really exciting is when actual content sort of transcends because you like the way the writer thinks or the way the writer fools you or the way the writer plays with their characters. I think that's the ultimate compliment for, I would assume, most writers.
So has your process for editing changed over the years?
Oh, absolutely. Not massively. I think, when I was first starting out with editing, I think a lot of my stuff was really, really, really focused on, I have a perspective on writing that is, saying the biggest thing with the fewest words in the most clean, easily readable by the highest number of people way is like, that is the pinnacle of achievement within writing. And when I first started editing, I was very spun up about words, Very, very, and it sounds dumb coming from an editor. Of course you're spun up about words. You're supposed to be. But actually, no, like initially you should be spun up about plot and character and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, so I think when I first started editing, I always hit on those other things, but I was much more concerned about like, how do I help somebody refine their prose? And I found that wasn't as valuable in the long run as teaching somebody how to construct greater stories. Because that writing sensibility develops over time. You can't actually teach somebody that. You can't actually help somebody go too far down that road. You can only continue to challenge them book after book after book.
A lot of times you hear with agents and editors, and I mean acquiring editors who might actually buy your book, that those first couple pages, sometimes they even say the first page, is just absolutely critical. And when you're editing, do you ever see like someone with a slow start where you're like, I think your story starts on page 10. What exactly should writers be doing to pull the reader in?
That's a hard one. Well, the first piece of advice that I want to say is like, it's more than your first page. Editors, especially acquisitions editors, but even more than that, agents are looking for a reason to say no to you. That is, so like walk into that situation with like they're not looking to say yes. I'm looking to say yes. That was my mistake. I was always like, I know there's something great in here. But that's not what these people are sending 100 books a day. You know what I mean? Like they are looking to say no to you. So, it can be something as small and as stupid as like, you didn't have like, on page 7, you hadn't pulled them into the character yet. And they're like, well, I need to be pulled in by page 7 on a character. And like everybody is different. And I used to sit with, I remember, I won't say his name, but big fancy agent. And I were talking not that long ago. And he was like, yeah, I give a book 3 pages at the most. If I'm not completely in love by page 3, I'm not going to read anymore. I don't have time. It's a sobering reality. And I'm very sorry to say if I'm the first person who's saying that to some of the people listening.
It's good to know.
Yeah, but like, I was always like 30 pages. That was my thing. And I think everybody's a little different, still very different. But if you go into that with that perspective, like they are looking to say no, I would always recommend having the first fourth of your book be just killer, like impossible to say no to. What are people looking for in that? This is where I feel like there's such an unfair advantage to already published authors, because so much of what people are looking for is dependent upon what's popular right now. And if you're not going to New York and sitting in these parties and talking to agents and editors all day and like, and also reading all of the big bestsellers, because everybody who works in this industry, as much as we may not like to admit it out loud, if a book is big, you read it. You have to know, like, well, what made it big? What made it good? Why are everybody loving it? So, like, you can kind of have a feel for what's happening. And when I say big, I mean millions of copies. I'm talking like #1 New York Times bestseller, like seen everywhere kind of thing. So it is slightly changing. And if you're in the industry, you're talking to people, you're hearing about it, you're keeping up on it, you're reading Publishers Lunch and Publishers Weekly, and you're like keeping up on like what's important and what everyone's talking about. So you can kind of not necessarily, I don't ever write to trends. I don't think people should write to trends, but you should remember what people are looking for, especially in the acquisition process. When you are putting your book out there to be bought, you kind of need to know like what everyone's wanting at that moment, and at least making sure that it's somewhere in your manuscript. But the best advice I can give is character. That's the biggest thing. And hook. Those are the 2 things that you're looking for right off the bat. So what's your elevator pitch? And can somebody reading the first, say, 15% of your book know what that pitch is without you giving them the pitch ahead of time? And all of that comes back to premise, which I talked about earlier, promise of the premise. Like what is the thing that we're talking about here? So it's not whether or not you have a psychic detective. Psychic detective is known. Is it psychic detective who is also having his thoughts read by somebody else? Now we have hooks. So your premise needs to be very neatly, carefully packaged in a box and handed to the editor or the acquisitions person. And the other thing that you need right off the bat is like a character that people really love for one reason or another. And they can love them because they hate them. They can love them because they're smart or because they're stupid or whatever. But, and uniqueness is the wrong term because, pretty much all humans fit into 10 categories of psychology and personality.
Yeah. We're not as special as we think we are.
Yeah, I got it. No snowflakes here. But at the same time, you need to feel like something intimate about your main character right off the bat. People need to feel that. And so I think a really great example is, if you haven't read The Maid, I would put that out there to anybody listening to this podcast as a great example of something where, first of all, the hook is very apparent in the very beginning of this book, but also it's in first person, which is a little bit of a cheat character-wise, but also harder in many ways to write. And we right off the bat are being exposed to this main character's vulnerabilities. It's like the first thing you see. And she doesn't know she's being vulnerable, but we can see how quickly somebody could take advantage of, hurt her, take her down the wrong path. And that, how is she going to possibly survive in the world that we live in? On page 1 is given to you. And that is the things that people are looking for. They're looking for that feeling of, I know that I want to take a journey with this person.
That's excellent. Excellent. Character and hook. I like that. Well, you know what? I have one last question about being an editor, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to say if there's anything you wish people knew about your profession. Are there any misconceptions you'd like to clear up?
You don't work for me. I work for you. I mean, I do feel like a lot of times authors, especially those who are really, really sincere and really, really want to be published, or at least have stories out there in the world that other people are enjoying and have readers, and your motivations can be fame and money, all the way down to I just want 5 people to have read my book and say it's okay and enjoyed it or affected their life in some way. All of those are incredibly amazing goals, no matter what they are or no matter where you're coming from on this. But I think a lot of people come to the editing table with this idea that they have to make me happy. And it is true, I can get grouchy if I'm this is the 3rd time I've talked to you about this, Karen, stop it. But you know what I mean? That can make one grouchy, that's fair. But at the end of the day, your name is on the book. You are the writer. You are God in this universe. And I think that is something that I think writers oftentimes don't, especially in the beginning, they don't completely appreciate. So you have the power as the writer, when I'm reading the book, to make me look and see and smell and hear whatever it is that you want. And I have to trust that you're going to respect that enough to have me look, see, and smell the things that matter instead of wasting my time. That's another piece of advice for another show. But also, because you are God, you get to decide if you agree with any editor at any given time. You get to decide if you want to actually take my advice. And the best people at editing aren't the people who do what I say. They're the people who look at the problem that I'm suggesting that they solve, and that they find their own version of a solution that solves that problem that feels authentic to them. And those are the people that are the happiest as writers, and those are the people that make it the furthest. Your job isn't to make your agent, your readers, or your editors happy. Your job is to make yourself happy and those people.
Excellent. Well, that's wonderful. We usually wrap up the podcast with some extra questions. This is non-book or writing related, and I'll ask, and you just spit out the first thing that comes to mind. What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Well, I'm a very adventurous eater, but I'm going to tell you that every time I have eel, I completely vomit. So eel.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh my God, that's actually a very, very hard question to answer. I mean, I know that who would probably get cast, and I'm not saying this because I'm beautiful or anything. It's just because I share enough physical attributes in my face with Emma Stone that I get that a lot.
Oh, sure.
So possibly her. I don't know. I would want it to be somebody really weird. I want
quirky, huh?
Person. Yeah. I want somebody who's as strange as I am.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
I think if I had a superpower, I think it would be to restore faith in basic scientific understanding in the world, so that we could solve climate change and stop arguing with each other about shit that is obvious.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
90 Day Fiancé.
Oh, I got hooked on Married at First Sight.
Ooh, I haven't seen that one yet. I'm a little scared
Not
of it.
this season, but previous seasons. I was like, I don't know why I even like this, but I do. What is the worst job you've ever had?
I was briefly a wedding planner. I have to tell you, don't do it.
Don't do that.
Just don't do it.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
I mean, I don't know if this is expertise, but I would love to have a better memory. You know, the problem with ADHD is you have bad short-term memory. I would love to be able to remember where I put my shoes.
What's your favorite smell?
Sandalwood.
What's the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
I think in general, in retrospect, it wasn't scary at the time. But the bravest thing that I did was probably becoming an editor when I don't know how to spell. You know, like in retrospect, that was probably a pretty brave thing to do. You know, dyslexia makes it difficult. When I was 18, I lived in a fairly abusive household, and I moved out and was homeless for a while. And that was probably the most I knew I was doing something brave thing in my life.
What's one thing you're really bad at?
Walking without falling over. Dancing. Probably dancing. I'm really bad at dancing.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
I mean, do I have self-awareness in this aversion?
Yeah,
do I remember my old
whatever
life?
you want. It's your question. You can play it any way you want.
Well, if I have self-awareness, I wouldn't, because I think that
You would not.
I think the only reason that I made it as far as I did is because I didn't know that I was doing stupid things when I did them. You know, there's so much about youth that comes with, like, you get because you take chances. You're not in your own head. You're not worried about what people think of you. But now that I've had so many experiences and learned so much, I would be like afraid that I would, you know, am I hurting my friends' feelings, when I never cared about that when I was a kid. But if I could do it over again and maybe just change like one aspect of my life, oh yeah, then I would totally do that.
Well, I thank you very much, Jackie, for taking the time to talk with us. And I know our listeners are going to be fascinated. And if you want to come back and talk about marketing someday, we'd love that as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen. And, you know, obviously, when you go through editing this and see how much I talked continuously, you may not want me back. But if you do, let me know.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks. All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.